get semantics from syntax, that this real meaning of what it means to be an apple is different than an ability to like recognize the word apple or something like that. And so that requires a different type of intelligence. And unfortunately, up until this point within the computing discourse, we lacked the philosophical tools to actually talk about intelligence in a real enough way that the implementation of that in an artificial intelligence field was even remotely possible. And that's going to continue on until we get into the 90s and even 2000s. And one of my main sources is a guy called Paul Jurisch. He wrote this book called Where the Action Is. And it's all about embodied interaction and embodied robotics, which is currently the forefront of artificial intelligence. But what's really cool about it is that it involves a resurgence of phenomenological principles from philosophers like Heidegger and Wittgenstein and Sartre even, and they pull all of those ideas in and these new philosophical mannerisms and ways of speaking about our intelligence and how it interacts with the world. And from that, we get an incredibly different implementation of that knowledge because the base level assumptions have changed and we make huge strides in artificial intelligence. Now, it's still something that is on the cusp that we're working towards, but we have a far better means to do so. And really what my argument was for the actual thing, a lot of it is history and a lot of it is various components, but the actual argument is that if you work in a field that resides or requires philosophical assumptions that inform the practice of that field and inform the implementation of the work that you do within that field, then you have a moral responsibility, even an obligation, to be up to date on what those philosophical assumptions that are informing those things really are. And that did not happen in computing. We fall into this Cartesian tradition or this rationalistic tradition, and for like literally almost 100 years, we're operating off of these Cartesian ideas. Descartes wrote his stuff at the same time as Leibniz, about 1650, and it was immediately afterwards that we started moving away from those ideas. Kant already brought us back into the world, and by the time you get to phenomenologists like Husserl, who actually saw himself as a Cartesianist and was trying to articulate phenomenology for mind and for body. And Heidegger, who's maybe my favorite, he's really famous for basically saying, no, we're going to place all of this knowledge, everything that we have within the world, we're never outside of the world, and to deny that there is something external to that is just, we don't have the means or the ability to say that. And that shift really changed intelligence. It wasn't this interaction between this abstract mind and this physical body, but suddenly it was really immersion. We get these ideas like along with Merleau-Ponty, another famous phenomenologist, and he talks about like phantom limb syndromes and walking, and how when you're actually engaged in walking, it's not this cerebral exercise, but it's intelligence that's dispersed throughout your entire body. So when I move my hand, I rely on muscle memory to do so. And those things are trained, those are embedded intelligence, and that is evident in computer systems that we have today. It used to be a centralized computing thing. Everything happened in one place. And then it was connected to these peripheral aspects, these ways of connecting to the world and this embodiment. But as we move into computers today, we actually have processors all over the place. There's computation happening everywhere. So your network card is communicating through your router. It's processing things independently from the central processing unit, which is relying on a graphics card, which has its own processor, which is developing all of these things. And it's integrating with these complicated, intelligent peripheral items like phones and routers that are themselves intelligent. And that type of embodiment was not possible until we actually started to reappraise what intelligence was. We were working off these false assumptions. And once we started incorporating these real ideas like Wittgenstein and even Chomsky to a certain point, this idea of this learned language that we in our brains aren't this infinitely malleable object, but we are set up to learn and experience the world in specific particular ways. As Wittgenstein would say, that like meaning is contained within language. And so suddenly we have these means for actually interacting with meaning, and you have job titles like ontological engineer, which are actual people that work within computing fields today. And they're essentially just really, really complicated versions of Aristotle who are trying to map out the world into a series of meaningful expressions such that we can translate our experience and our intelligence in such a manner that is unique and representative and could be replicated theoretically on a computing system that running the correct program is a mind. And so it's really cool. That I don't know if we can actually attain that necessarily, but I know that we're going to get a lot closer if we continue to refresh those philosophical assumptions and stay true to the roots of our actual.
So where are we going with that? Where can it take us to?
Well,
what are the possibilities?
Fundamentally, the argument that I'm saying is that basically every field relies on philosophical assumptions to a certain extent, that you have to have an understanding of what it is to be a rational thinking person within a world of complicated meaning and syntax, that what it means to be that kind of entity, or Dasein as Heidegger would call it, is informative and important in relation to whatever you're doing with your life, whether that be art or science or computer science or lumberjacking. Like it doesn't really necessarily matter, but we can't see those strides, and really it's an argument against stagnation, and it's utilitarian to an extent in that regard, that I basically hold stagnation as something that we are trying to avoid, and it's something you can very obviously see, and within the literature they point to this entire area of stagnation where we are crippled by the rationalistic tradition within the computing fields, and it's really because of, honestly, a bit of smugness that we don't have these relations. It's almost like the FBI and the CIA. Like they have their own files on different people, but they don't actually communicate. And so they have these different dependent, isolated intelligence. And yet if they just like share all of their things, they would collectively be a far more better and functioning unit. So you have to get over the bureaucracy to a certain extent within the academia, between these two discourses. But fundamentally, the relationship between philosophy and computing not only grounds in a large way both of those discourses within each other historically, but pragmatically in the current day, that we have to be able to rely and replenish and reevaluate our actual philosophical assumptions that inform these types of things. Otherwise, we're just going to fall crippled to stagnation. If I don't constantly, learn and investigate what it means to be intelligent, then if I'm trying to create intelligence, I'm doing myself and the entire discourse a disservice. And so that's essentially what my argument was within the whole thesis. It was pretty dramatic.
And you rolled that in there.
That was longer than I meant it to be.
No, it's quite all right. Fascinating.
I didn't get the verse part, but I don't think it matters that much.
Well, thank you. That's
I just
fabulous.
realized after a while, I was like,
We didn't
the
get
numbers
to see it,
aren't
but it's
moving.
cool because
Yeah, when
Me
it's
too.
finished written,
And this
you can
part of
read
it.
it. It's 22 pages. It has section headers to make it a little bit better.
he's gonna send me the paper though. And Charles wants to read your paper too, by the
Oh
way.
yeah, I can send it to him. I have a
Oh,
paper
send it to
copy
him
too.
today.